It's wonderful to have you all here, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, Dr. Mark Trozzi from Canada, and Andrew Bridgen. So we're representing quite a part of the globe, both sides of the equator as well. But the other day, when I saw Albert Bourla in the Oval Office with President Trump, and this head of Pfizer, and Pfizer was the only injection rolled out here in New Zealand, being hailed as a good man, I truly put my hands on my head and just felt a despair I haven't felt since the early days of the COVID rollout. So, Mary, that was when I reached out to you again. We've been trying to sort out a time that suits. So I'm up here at 4 a.m. in a New Zealand cold spring morning to welcome you. And I want to begin with each of you perhaps doing a brief introduction. I'm sure most people do know you, but there may be new people to this interview who are not familiar with the work you've done. So if you could briefly talk about your last 5 years, and we'll begin with you, Mark Trozzi, and then you, Andrew, and Mary, your story.
Well, certainly. So at the beginning of the COVID operation, I was in my 27th year of practice as an emergency doctor, and I was teaching trauma medicine, critical resuscitation, and I've held teaching positions at 3 Canadian medical schools. I was therefore a frontline doctor through COVID, and the discrepancies between science, reality, and the agenda were profound. And it was actually quite shocking to see how most of my colleagues were kind of going along with, the combination of follow the money and follow public health rules, and they really weren't studying the science. And so it was a very unusual year. Where I think, like a lot of doctors, you felt yourself sort of becoming isolated when you were studying science and looking at realities of COVID science, realities of data, PCR, all these sort of things. But towards the end of the year, we were first able to get access to documents regarding these injections that they called safe and effective vaccines. And that was the emergency use authorizations that Pfizer, Moderna, and others made to the FDA, Canada Health Agencies, et cetera. And it was very obvious at that point that these were not vaccines, that these were extremely dangerous genetic injections, which made no sense and were only going to cause harm. And the science to back that opinion up was profound. And so at that point, it was already quite clear in Canada, like other countries, that even doctors who tried to treat COVID when you did have a case were having their licenses stripped, et cetera. So it was quite clear that this was a state of war. And so I opted to resign all my jobs. I resigned from the hospitals I worked at, said I was taking a sabbatical to do human rights work, sold our home, and just committed my life savings in the last 5 years, A, to trying to stop the injections, B, now trying to help the people who've been injured and advance the research on what to do about people who've been genetically modified to poison themselves, essentially. And that journey has involved a lot of things. A big part of it is I've been deeply involved as one of the directors of the World Council for Health, as well as co-founder of World Council for Health Canada. And so that's essentially my journey. Of course, like any Canadian doctor who would not submit to the agenda, my license was revoked in the process. And in Canada, things in some ways are worse than the States, that the courts are completely compromised. And so even if you do take things to court, the court accepts on something called judicial notice that anything the government said is true, and there's no need to look at science or data or any of that. So that's the journey I continue on. I'm involved in research and public education and activism on a full-time basis now.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the brevity of that, because there's so much with each of you we could go into from the past 5 years. So to keep it quite tight, I really want to get into the hard-hitting facts and truth about what's going on and what's being ignored in the world, so that people can really share this across the world and help others to wake up 5 years in. When I spoke to you about 6 months ago, Mark, you described it like this: it's a highly DNA adulterated, chemically contaminated experiment in infinite tissue penetration of nanoparticles. That was just the most alarming description. Andrew Bridgen, you were one of the few politicians around the world who at the time stood up and called it out. So if you could briefly sum up your last 5 extraordinarily courageous years.
Well, I've been a member of the UK Parliament, elected since 2010, 4 times elected when the pandemic came round. It just happened that a very long time ago, I studied biological sciences with biochemistry, specialising in virology, genetics and behaviour at University at Nottingham. So I had an interest in what was going on during the pandemic, but I was taken along with it to begin with. MPs were locked down in the constituency. Parliament wasn't working. It was government by diktat, working remotely. That's not working at all. My suspicions around the whole pandemic response only heightened as time went on. I saw the effects of the lockdowns and the increased suicide rate in northwest Leicestershire, my constituency. I raised these concerns with the government. It was falling on deaf ears. But the Omicron variant came out. I voted against any further lockdowns, restrictions, masking, the mandates against the NHS staff, forcing them to take the vaccine. I voted against all of that and spoke against it. I was offered a bribe in January 2022 from a senior operator at number 10 of anything I wanted to shut up and play along with the game. I refused that. And I spoke out in 2022 to stop the government from jabbing infants down to babies down to 6 months. And as soon as I spoke out on that, I was cancelled by the mainstream media, ostracised by other MPs, and eventually thrown out of the Conservative Party. And behind the scenes, lots of MPs agreed with me. Lots of them, well, a number of them admitted they were vaccine harmed, badly vaccine harmed, and had relatives that were vaccine harmed, but no one was willing to speak out. There was something deeply rotten in our politics, that people weren't standing up and speaking truth to power and weren't there representing the best interests of the people. I believe that the election in North West Leicestershire in July 2024, I believe it was completely rigged, and my votes were taken from the ballot box to ensure I didn't get back into Parliament. And I've carried on speaking around the country to larger and larger audiences as people wake up to what's been perpetrated and is being perpetrated against them.
And I just want to mention a post you've just put up last night. I ask everybody to follow all three. People will put your ex-posts here, but particularly Andrew, who's being very shadow banned in the UK. You wrote this: future generations will look back on this time and think we lost our collective minds regarding COVID, gene therapies, carbon dioxide, net zero, illegal migration, wars, and on and on. And then you say it's all down to the corrupt politicians and institutions. Mary, if anybody has come up against that, it is you. Could you briefly tell us about your last 5 years? We'll put the Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan interviews you did underneath for greater detail, and I suggest everybody listen to this. But it's extraordinary what you did, from even offering saliva tests when nobody was offering those, a brave doctor like Dr. Trozzi speaking out and doing the right thing for the patients. What would you say were the most egregious parts of the last 5 years for you, Mary? And there were many.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, I'm a solo practitioner, ear, nose, and throat doctor in Houston, Texas. And I made the mistake of speaking out against mandates, of talking about ivermectin. I had privileges at the first hospital in the country to mandate the COVID shots. That was Houston Methodist Hospital. They did it 5 months before Biden. They really paved the way for the rest of the country. I had very loose ties with this hospital, but when I started speaking out, because I was treating COVID patients, I treated over 6,000 COVID patients during the pandemic. But I quickly realized that the shots weren't working, that they were causing more harm than benefit, and that ivermectin was working. And so I started speaking out on social media about it, and they really went after me. They suspended my privileges. They accused me of spreading dangerous misinformation. They reported me to the medical board. I am still fighting the medical board 4 years later. I have a hearing coming up in a week from Friday to determine my punishment. Because wrapped up in speaking out, I tried to help a dying patient in the hospital obtain ivermectin. His wife sued the hospital to try to get him ivermectin, and there was a court order granting me privileges at the hospital, which the hospital refused to comply with, and then reported me to the medical board. So it's been a big mess, but I do have one big win. I sued the FDA, and Mark, you mentioned that the government is always right, and it's also always right in the United States. There's something called sovereign immunity. It's very hard to sue the government and win, but we did it. We sued them over their big horse tweet. So you might remember the healthcare worker nuzzling the horse, and the caption said, "Seriously, y'all, you're not a horse, you're not a cow, stop it." They also put misinformation on their website where they told physicians you should not use ivermectin to treat COVID, and they told the public that, and we forced them to take that down. Since all this has happened, I started an organization called Americans for Health Freedom, and our foundational project is to get politicians like Andrew Bridgen to simply state that the COVID shot should be pulled off the market. So we had a growing list of people who, with microphones, use their bully pulpit to just get the word out. But we obviously, what happened in the Oval Office last week was a gigantic slap in the face to all of us, particularly the injured. And I appreciate you, Liz, for continuing to cover this topic because this war is far from over.
It was. I'd like your reaction, Mark, and also Andrew. It was that moment where you think, I wrote to Andrew and said, I just feel, why have I dedicated 5 years of my life to working for nothing to get these messages out? It's all been futile. Mark, what was your reaction for that moment?
Well, my initial reaction, I put on Twitter, I said, Albert Bourla the butcher, is this a joke? And if this is a joke, I hope the joke is being played on him. And I continue to put forward, if you want money from Pfizer, if you want money from, in my opinion, people have committed major crimes against humanity, like Pfizer, like Bill Gates. You don't have to deal with them. You should arrest them and seize the assets of crime. And then we can start using that to help the victims of these crimes. So that was my initial response. I've looked into it a little bit more. And I'm certainly not an expert in the geopolitics or the contract in that respect. But I understand that the contract doesn't specifically, involve more mRNA, and that it involves Pfizer doing things that would invest in drug manufacturing in the United States and reducing drug costs for Americans. Now, I hope that's the case. I'm not an expert on 5D chess like people talk about. I hope that's what we're seeing here. So that's my response. That's my optimism. And I think if there's any talk of messenger RNA vaccines is adequate reason to revolt, because any mRNA, anytime you genetically modify a human being to produce a foreign protein, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to see at least 2/3 of the disaster we have, with tens of millions dead, hundreds of millions of injured, and really 6 billion at risk of immune system deterioration and other long-term effects that we're observing in people's blood work. So I hope that Bourla is being played. I hope this is about getting cheaper repurposed drugs for Americans rather than mRNA factories. But I'm very concerned, like yourself. It was very hard to sleep that night. So those are my thoughts at this point.
Andrew, you have had so many people in your electorate and beyond, all around England, say, how can we get a voice on many issues? But on this jab issue, it's as if they want everybody who's been saying, no, this is a crime, as Mark says, they want us all just to go quietly. They want the injured to go quietly, to die quietly. We have just heard in New Zealand, this is devastating, that Gavi, which is another Gates arm, is now to be chaired by Helen Clark, a former Prime Minister, who was really the mentor to Jacinda Ardern, who was one of the major monsters during the COVID rollout. So, Andrew, what was your reaction when you heard that? When you heard that, and also when you heard about Bourla? Yeah.
I was shocked when Albert Bourla was introduced as some sort of hero in the Oval Office by President Trump, especially after the way that President Trump had moved his position on the vaccines from the father of warp speed to someone who was asking questions of Pfizer and Moderna that they really couldn't answer to prove that their vaccines were safe and effective and had saved millions of lives. When I was thrown out of the Conservative Party for speaking out on the vaccines in 2023, none of my colleagues who I'd served in Parliament with for 12 years even contacted me, but I did get a call from a US presidential candidate within an hour, and that was Robert Kennedy Jr. And I watched his face when Albert Bourla was in the Oval Office, and the eyes don't lie. He was pretty upset about all of that. I think that Robert Kennedy Jr. is placing his chess pieces on the board with his appointments. He's got a lot of pushback from the CDC, and most of its employees were in the revolving door of employment with Big Pharma. And I still think he's going to come through for us. And President Trump's probably moved his position enough that he can now say, Big Pharma lied to me, they lied to you at the end. But I wish they get on with it, because it's agony here. And in the UK, we're so locked down with our controlled media, and our current Labour government are sticking with the safe and effective narrative, which is so 2021.
And you invited a lot of experts to Parliament when you were in there, Andrew. I do want you briefly to address somebody who's being hailed as a potential mover and shaker politically in the UK, Nigel Farage. What did he say when you approached him in Parliament to tell him that he must stand with you?
It was in London. It was outside Parliament. He was only a broadcaster at the time. I was a member of Parliament, but he was an influential figure. And I met him in January 2023, told him everything I knew about the vaccines, asked him to help me stop them jabbing the infants in the UK, because I'd exhausted all avenues in Parliament. And he listened for an hour and a half. And at the end, he just turned to me and said, Andrew, I will not be speaking about the vaccines. And if I were you, if you know what's good for you, you won't either. So he knew what was going on, and he was quite happy to stand back and see children killed and maimed by these experimental vaccines that weren't going to do them any good. Indeed, were going to do them a lot of harm. And no healthy children of that age had died of COVID. They're at no risk, certainly not from Omicron anyway.
And this is the game, Mary, isn't it? The politicians keep going along to get along. How are you going with reaching out to the politicians in America? What are the reactions you're getting?
We had a lot of momentum early on. It seems to have died down, of course. I think just that's the culture, is people are really tired of speaking about COVID. And I feel I'm a little worried because of Kennedy in office. People are becoming even more complacent. So I urge people that we really need to get loud. There seems to be this division where, if you criticize what's going on, then you're hurting Kennedy. I believe that we just need to keep the pressure on, keep the foot on the pedal as much as we can. And that, if anything, that might help him. If President Trump sees how outraged the public is, I think it helps Kennedy.
I want to talk about something you said in the Tucker Carlson interview that really, really hit me hard. And even though I've been doing 5 years of this, it was about the babies, which Andrew's alluded to. You spoke with Tucker about the horror of potential myocarditis for tiny babies that have no speech to tell their parents what's really going on. Could you elaborate on that?
Myocarditis is a difficult diagnosis. The only way you can truly confirm it is with a cardiac MRI or a cardiac biopsy. You have to go on the history primarily, and there are, it can show some EKG changes and some blood work, but it's really a diagnosis primarily of symptoms. So if you've got a nonverbal child who can't tell you that they have chest pain, then you're not screening them for myocarditis. There could be millions of babies out there that had myocarditis and we wouldn't even know it. Myocarditis can leave a permanent scar on the heart, which leads to a lifelong risk of sudden cardiac death. So we may not have seen the full effects of these shots and the babies that got them before they could even speak.
That's horrific, Mark. That is horrific to think of a baby silently suffering with no way of communicating.
Well, it certainly is. And, there are studies looking at, with PET scans, look at the rate of glucose uptake by heart cells, which is a sign of how hard are those heart cells working to be alive. And you see 100% of people with the jab, without even a complaint of chest pain, have significantly increased metabolic strain on their heart cells. So, there's no question. And when you put this in the context that there has really never been any real scientific reason, justification, first of all, to vaccinate against coronaviruses, to even use a real vaccine for the spike protein, to do it in the context of an active infection spreading or, pandemic or not, and then to use a genetic injection that clearly has many toxic effects. The only reason that you could think to do this would be diabolical, and that is you drive the evolution of variants. You basically turn the injection victims into the petri dishes where variants grow from. And what we've seen is, instead of a normal pandemic that wraps up in a few months, we've seen variant after variant after variant after variant. And meanwhile, Big Pharma has you've really, when people like Bill Gates say, I'm going to turn you into your own little vaccine factory. No, you're turning people into their own poisoners. In other words, their own cells are being genetically modified to poison themselves and to cause their immune system to attack themselves. And as long as you don't do obvious tests, which seem very much missing, like testing for the spike protein in people, or doing proper immunofluorescence staining and autopsies. In other words, there's such a pervasive cover-up through the medical industry that's clearly been hijacked with the WHO as sort of the conduit of control. What you've done is you have now triggered a swath of pretty much every symptom you can think of, from myocarditis to miscarriages to strokes to dementia to kidney failure, liver failure, cancers. And as long as these blinders are kept on medicine, so these things can be seen out of context. And so now you have, for instance, myocarditis. So now you have people who can become experts in treating myocarditis in children, a previously non-existent thing, without even recognizing what is the underlying pathology, that their heart cells are producing foreign proteins. And so you have this big industry swelling, and Big Pharma plans to cash in. I mean, Pfizer's already reinvested their money in cancer treatment pharmaceuticals. So, I mean, that's how diabolical it is. Under false pretenses, poisoning the population, creating not only an endless coronavirus industry, but creating, by Pfizer's own document, 1,100 different ways people can be diagnosed, the way they can prevent as adverse events. And as long as it's not being recognized for what it is, now the industry can reinvest in treating these people. So the people are being used and basically slow killed. And Big Pharma that did it is profiting on it. And this must be stopped. There's no way out of this that doesn't involve facing the hardcore reality of crimes against humanity. There's no other way out of this. And I agree with Dr. Bowden. Like she said, well, COVID's kind of over. We're not being forcibly injected this week. There's all this cancer around, but we can pretend it has nothing to do with it. Well, it's not over for the victims. It's not over for 6 billion people whose immune systems are currently slipping, their CD8 cells slipping, their immunoglobulins slipping on their way to the new AIDS. And Big Pharma there to cash in on the whole thing. I mean, these are the worst villains that we've seen in our lifetime, no question. And again, coming back to the dance with Bourla in the Oval Office, I really hope Bourla's being played, because any of us who've been watching the show, Bourla is regarded as one of the worst villains in the world. And I really hope he is being played. But I agree again with my colleagues. People need to keep shouting loud. There's a tendency for humans to deal with something when it's right in their face. Like today, they're at the door to forcibly inject your baby. But we've got to realize this was just one major operation against mankind in a giant medical war on the human population. And so we need to keep pushing back. We need to keep shouting loud. And again, hopefully, we know that RFK is very aware of the realities. And let's hope that President Trump will respond to our pressure to say, hey, why don't we just lock these guys up and take all their profits? We don't need to do business with them to take their money, because they're proceeds of crime.
I'd love reactions from both of you. Mary, what do you feel when you hear that?
Yeah. I mean, I echo Dr. Trozzi. We just have to really fight hard. And this is an information war. It has been from the start. I'm still dealing with censorship. And I'm sure Andrew Bridgen, I'd love to hear what's going on in England with the censorship, because I know it sounds like it's been even ramped up harder. But we must keep the pressure up. We must keep fighting, because I continue to see injured patients on a daily basis in my practice. So I am constantly reminded of what happened. And these people were previously healthy and their lives have been utterly destroyed. And the government is doing absolutely nothing for them. There is a fund set aside for the vaccine injured, the CICP. They have rejected 98% of claims. They have given out just tiny amounts of money to the injured. And most of the people that I have seen didn't even know there was a fund, and none of them were reported to VAERS, the reporting system. So there are just so many people out there that have been gaslit and ignored and are really suffering. It's very hard as a practicing physician to treat these patients. It's a lot of trial and error. It's frustrating because we don't have the government backing any studies for funding. So it's collaboration behind the scenes with other doctors who are seeing the same patients. It's very frustrating. It's a big problem.
Andrew, your reaction to both?
Well, fortunately, in the UK, because I did speak out, the government never dared approve those vaccines for infants in the UK. The whole thing's shocking. I mean, I exposed to the then Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and the vaccine minister that there was batch 1 and batch 2 of the vaccines, and that the actual vaccines that gained emergency approval around the world were not the vaccines that went into people's arms. They were manufactured in a completely different way with another set of more severe side effects that were never tested. We have a vaccine injury compensation scheme running in the UK. It's pathetic. Very few people qualify. Can you imagine an insurance policy where you have to be demonstrate that you're 60% harmed by something to get a penny? I mean, can you imagine me running into my car into yours and saying, sorry, Liz, I'm not paying out. Your car's still 41% okay. I mean, it's ludicrous. And I actually had a constituent, I can name him, I named him in Parliament, Stephen Miller, in his late 40s. He had 2 AstraZeneca jabs. After the second one, he was so ill he lost his job. He was very well paid IT engineer working in the quarrying industry, lost his partner, was losing his house. He had a diagnosis eventually of vaccine-induced cardiomyopathy, 75% left ventricular failure, and he was given 5 years to live unless he gets a heart transplant, and he's not getting a heart transplant. And his maximum compensation will be £120,000, and he's probably lost 30 years of his life at least.
He's lost everything. So many have lost money. Just symptoms-wise, Mary, what else are you seeing? You mentioned to Tucker and to Joe Rogan, skin conditions are a big thing, aren't they? But here in New Zealand, we have rampant cancers. Are you seeing a lot of that in your practice?
Well, I don't see a lot of cancer personally. I focus on just sort of the vaccine injuries that are direct. And as an ENT doctor, I focus on ENT issues as well. But I do have friends at MD Anderson who have told me that they've never seen anything like it, that they're seeing very young people with advanced cancer. And the problem is, the CDC has all of the cancer data for the country, but they have not released new information since 2022. So we don't know the actual data. What they release is based on modeling when they say the current numbers, but it's not the actual data. And we need the CDC to release that data.
They also suppress data in every area. We've been trying to get out the Barry Young data, and they've spent close to $3 million. The Ministry of Health in New Zealand, which claims it has no money to help people, they've spent nearly $3 million to suppress it, Mark. I mean, that alone tells us all that data is extraordinarily valuable for a population of 5 million, and what it does reveal about the rollout of the Pfizer jabs here. They really want to keep the secrets secret, don't they, Mark?
Well, there's no question. I mean, even going back to 2021, we could see that when the data in Canada showed that there was much higher rate of serious infection and COVID disease in people that took these so-called vaccines, the government said, oh, we're going to stop reporting vaccination status with COVID data. So what that meant is, instead of people being able to look and say, oh my God, if you take that shot, you're going to get COVID. Instead, the data said, oh, there's lots of COVID still, so we better take our shots. I mean, that level of deception goes back to the beginning of this. And the big trick up their sleeve is, again, you have so many outcomes. People really need to understand, there's no spike protein in the shot. The shot genetically modifies the person to make a spike protein, which is a poison and which causes their own immune system to attack their own tissues, be it a child's heart or a woman's placenta. And in the process, the immune system deteriorates. You have a new form of AIDS that's developing. That's the wave that we're coming into now. And so just like with AIDS, if people never zoned in and said, hey, look, there's a virus causing all this, Instead, they'd run around treating cancers and infections and all these other diseases. What a beautiful industry.
And I
You've
think
now created tons of sick people with all these.
No, sorry, Mark, there's a slight delay with you, which may be that censorship you've got going on in Canada as well. But yes, what a lucrative industry they've created for themselves with all of the illness they've created from the jabs. It's extraordinarily cynical. I want to go to a piece I sent you all, which has not yet been published in the full film, but I was sent this from the UK the other day, and I think it's really important. We'll just have a quick look at this, the story behind the rollout of these jabs.
Here we can see a chart that looks at the total world population over the last several hundred years. And at first glance, this is a bit scary. We go from less than 1 billion in 1800, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.4 billion where we are today. Well, over this decade, we believe unbelievable progress can be made, both inventing new vaccines and making sure they get out to all the children who need them. The benefits there in terms of reducing sickness, reducing the population growth, it really allows the society a chance to take care of itself once you've made that intervention.
The benefits there in terms of reducing sickness, reducing the population growth.
As reported by the Wall Street Journal and Times of London, in May 2009, on the initiative of Bill Gates, a small group of billionaires gathered at the Manhattan home of British biochemist and president of Rockefeller University, Sir Paul Nurse, to discuss how their enormous collective wealth could be used to solve the problem of overpopulation, in a meeting so discreet that some of the billionaires' aides were told they were at security briefings. Present at this highly secretive meeting were, among others, David Rockefeller, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett and Ted Turner, each of whom has, in the past, expressed a desire to significantly reduce the world's population.
The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population.
We've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
Mr. Turner, I was wondering if you think it's a good idea to reduce 90% of the population because we are being overpopulated by a lot of...
90%.
80? Prince Philip said 80, sir. I go with 85.
I think 2 billion is about right.
The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
We could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
And then the final solution, which is a year to 2 years off, is the vaccine.
Just to head off the conspiracy theorists, maybe we shouldn't call the vaccine the final solution. Maybe just the best solution. Okay.
So there in that piece, we saw a headline, Wall Street Journal, The Times, billionaire club in bid to curb world's population. And we have Bill Gates, yet again, his hand is behind so much of this, a major eugenicist, Andrew. Were you aware of that meeting in May 2009 in the UK?
No, but I have been made aware since that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is very famous for its supposed philanthropy, its originally name was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for Population Control. They just changed the name. I was introduced to Bill and Melinda Gates by the then Prime Minister David Cameron. I think it was 2012. And I remember he addressed all the Conservative MPs at the time in the 1922 committee, Committee Room 14 in House of Commons. And I remember him saying, I'm working on some new vaccines and you're really going to like them. Well, I don't like them very much. Coming back to the cancer, I mean, Pfizer not declaring to the regulators that they'd put the simian virus 40 promoter region, which has been linked to cancer promotion for a very long time into their so-called vaccine, their gene therapy. I mean, there's so many ways that those vaccines can cause cancer or lead to cancers. Anything that disrupts the immune system is going to increase cancer rates. The DNA contamination, which some of the vials tested have got more DNA in them than RNA anyway, and that can lead to introduction to the nucleus and disruption of the genetic sequences, which can lead to cancer. And the fact that, I think it was in 2023, after the vaccine rollout, that Pfizer spent $43 billion acquiring a cancer treatment company, I think that tells you a lot about how cynical Big Pharma is. And of course, through my research in the UK, and you were spared it, I believe, in America and Canada, but in 1961 we had something withdrawn called thalidomide, which caused a catastrophic effect on unborn children. The marketing slogan of thalidomide was safe and effective. And of course, that meant that Big Pharma are not allowed to use that claim without caveats after the thalidomide scandal. But of course, it was politicians and doctors and health advisors to governments that did the marketing for Big Pharma this time. And that was completely wrong. But a lot of these political reputations are there's so much political capital behind the vaccine rollout now. When the truth comes out, it's going to take out a whole generation of politicians and bureaucrats. And of course, before I was thrown out of the Conservative Party, they admitted to me that they wanted to cover up the vaccine harms for 20 years. They covered up thalidomide for 11 years. Back in the 60s.
Thalidomide was a pill taken to stop morning sickness in pregnancy, Mary. I'm sure you're well aware of it. But it took 5 years for them to even begin to question these children who were born with...
11 years before the word thalidomide was mentioned after the drug was withdrawn in the UK Parliament.
Incredible. It's incredible. And can we go for another 6 years of this? Mary, if you were in the Oval Office yourself with President Trump, what would your message be directly to him? Maybe use his name here. What would you say to him, given the carnage you're seeing?
Well, this is what I ask all the politicians. Would you give your grandchild or your child another mRNA shot? Would you subject them to that? And if not, why not? Because if it's not safe enough for you, if it's not safe enough for your child, if it's not safe enough for your grandchild, then why is it safe enough for the people that you represent? It basically boils down to that. I highly doubt anybody in the Trump family would dare give one of these shots to their children. And so why, if that's the case, then why is it safe enough for the rest of America?
Have any of you done FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests, on the numbers who were excluded? Here in New Zealand, it's been shown 11,000 exclusions were issued by Jacinda Ardern. Obviously, for the bureaucrats, the people, the politicians didn't take it. Have any of you got ideas, Mark, in Canada, for example, of who was excluded? It's very telling. They knew.
I don't have that personally. But if I could share a thought related to that, which is anyone who did not receive a communication in 2020 or beginning of 2020, anyone on this planet, any of you 8 billion people that did not receive a communication saying, hey, whatever you do, don't take this thing coming out, being called a vaccine. If you didn't receive that phone call, then you and your family are a target. And so I think that should help it make very clear that approximately 8 billion of us are at war with a few thousand of us. And that probably includes President Trump. And to President Trump, I would say, you are a wartime president, but the war isn't with Russia. The war isn't between two countries. The war is with a global parasite class against the entire species. And of course, doing the right thing is a chance to be one of the greatest heroes in the history of humanity, and also make sure that humanity is here to have a history.
Yeah.
Andrew, that piece we showed where clearly there's a eugenics agenda behind this is not an exaggeration. People really need to wake up to what Mark's just said. The governments are the puppets of the parasite class, the globalist parasite class. They are not our friends, are they? Maybe you can sum up here, as you have in other interviews, so succinctly. What's the end game here? Why would a government want to hurt us? That's the reply you get from people who don't yet want to fully look at what has been rolled out, Andrew. What is the answer to that?
I think the robotics and the artificial intelligence is so good that the elites have got hold of, that they think they only need enough of us on the planet for their own amusement. They don't want to keep us. They don't want the useless eaters. They hate democracy. And, I'm thinking about President Trump's election in 2016 and the referendum to leave the European Union. They know they can't, as much as they try and fix democracy, they can't completely control it, and they hate that. So they'd rather be rid of us. And by pushing this green agenda that humans are the reason the planet's in a mess, which is absolute nonsense. There's no science. There's less science behind that than there is the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines. But they've just like they've bought the medical profession, they've bought the scientists, and anyone that goes against any of their narratives are just completely shot down by a well-controlled media. I come back to what I was told when I was given my final warning to stop speaking about the vaccines, and that was that there's currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines, Andrew. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you that will entail should you continue to do so. And they're not lying. I mean, that's what they do. But we either stand up now and kick back against all of this, or it's really not going to be worth living anyway for those few who survive.
So I think here we will cut to you, Mary, with what hope you feel, because at this stage, even for people who are seasoned in the horrors of this, let alone somebody new coming to this interview, it is an horrific thing. It's Orwellian, but it's beyond that. I mean, Frankenstein science, and we have people who want to see us and our families killed off early. So, Mary, what hope is there that you see?
Well, we are dealing with forces bigger than Goliath, and this came out at the last ACIP meeting in September. Only 10% of healthcare
stands for, we'll just spell out what that stands for.
Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices.
Yes.
And this came out during the meeting, the CDC's own data, only 10% of healthcare workers got the latest version of the COVID shot. And in terms of the general population, well, the CDC used to post that information on a regular basis, but it didn't fit their narrative. So they took down that information. But the last time I checked, it was something about, I think it was 12% of the population. Only 12% got the latest version of the COVID shot. So despite what it seems, we are winning the information war. People are scared to get these shots. They are realizing. And so that's what gives me hope, is that even though mainstream media and the government makes you think that they're winning, the people are not buying it.
That's wonderful. Mark, your source of nourishment for the soul when it's dark.
Well, thanks so much.
What do you turn to, Mark?
I think there's, I'll be brief, but I think there's a few things. I think, as Dr. Bowden just said, we are winning the information war. Look at how low the uptake is on the shots. I think that, we use a term, or I don't use it anymore, but what people call the mainstream media isn't really the mainstream anymore. I mean, when Joe Rogan has a larger audience than CNN, or more importantly, the collective audience of you, Liz, and of others that are, reaching hundreds of thousands of people on a regular basis, that collectively is the mainstream media. And I think it's very important for people to pull out of the trance of believing that everyone's believing the mainstream media, because a lot of people are staying silent because they're looking around and going, well, all these people believe the narrative. They don't. Go ahead, folks, start talking, be open about it. And I think another thing we're seeing is, we were ambushed. Like they jumped us. Humanity didn't see this coming. I mean, nobody saw COVID coming. I mean, we could have, we should have, maybe, because they planned it. The patents are there. The planning strategy means is all there, but we didn't see it coming. And at the beginning, it was just individuals like Andrew, like Mary, like yourself, like myself, and many others in our own little neighborhoods, in our own hospitals, saying, hey, what's going on, and figuring this out. But we've come together. And there is indeed a crumbling civilization, but there is a growing civilization, and we are that civilization. And we don't have to wait for 90% of people to all row the boat. 3% of us can do it, and we have more than that already. And another advantage you have for the people who are awake to what's going on is we're tending to stay alive and stay healthy. So they have a dying slave class, and we have a thriving rebirth of a new civilization. We'd like to use some of the old institutions, but we're not waiting for it. I mean, case in point, World Council for Health and other organizations that are growing to deal with this. So I think people need to press forward with faith and say your prayers and meditate. They have AI, but clearly this is the godly side of this war.
And Andrew, we've often talked of that. It is a spiritual war at its heart, isn't it? This is a great evil force that unrolls.
It's not about right and left of politics. It's about right and wrong, and people can see which the right side is. I agree with what Mary and Mark have said, and I take great solace in however many people wake up, and more people are waking up to what's been perpetrated against them, as unpalatable as it is. There's no way back once they've woken up. There's nothing our government is going to put out on television or anything, the leaflet through the door, which is going to put them back to sleep once they've woken up. It's a one-way street. And that is, to a point, why governments are panicking in many parts of the world and trying to bring in more restrictions on digital ID and what we can view on the internet, and ban Liz Gunn or Joe Rogan or who else. But I think that's waking people up in themselves. They're panicking now because they've got to take more measures which are actually going to wake more people up more quickly. I think we're rapidly moving into the end game because I don't think they've got many cards to play. And the great solace is I don't think they'd ever get away with another scamdemic again. Now there's too many people know what's going on.
I want to play here a piece from Bill Gates, which I sent you also, and we'll drop this in. It is so sloppy, the science of this. It is so revolting the way he talks, the cavalier way he speaks of it. If you listen, making the mRNA is really easy and really cheap, so it's clearly motivated by money, and that's the magic of this. And then he says, we can mess around for the next 5 years. Have a listen.
Making the mRNA is really easy and really cheap, and that's the magic of this thing. But there's no doubt in the next 5 years, we just need to mess around. There's a lot of lipid nanoparticles, and some are very self-assembling. There's no inherent reason it's not thermostable, it's not cheap, and it's not scalable. And so as over the 5 years, we fix that part of it, mature it, which is very typical, we'll be able to build factories worldwide that can make $2 vaccines with even less lead time than we've had to have here during this pandemic. And we'll use those, as you suggest. For every disease that we don't have vaccines, we will try mRNA. In fact, for HIV, we have multiple ways, one that's more of a B cell approach, one that's more of a T cell approach. For malaria, we have multiple ideas. For TB, we have multiple ideas. And so to fill in the missing vaccines, we'll make a lot of our bets of the Gates Foundation and others who care about global health will be mRNA focused.
So, Mary, that is just revolting. He, in this throwaway way, he talks about your profession as if, we'll find a new disease, we'll find a new mRNA jab, as if we are nothing more than, I don't know how they regard us, the kind of cockroach, a sort of ant, while they live the good life. It is disgraceful, isn't it? The way someone like Bill Gates and Garvey, they're prostituting the medical profession and science. Are they not, Mary?
Yeah, it's concerning. There have been rumors that he is flirting with President Trump. And so I wonder, if President Trump is making deals with Pfizer, is he also making deals with Bill Gates? He is practicing medicine without a license and getting away with it. There's been talk about doctors really speaking up and standing against Bill Gates. He is not a doctor. He is motivated by money. He's motivated by population control. And he has an enormous amount of undeserved power.
He's not voted in, Andrew, and he couldn't even keep viruses out of his computers. How on earth can he keep viruses out of humans?
He made a lot of money out of viruses in his computers. Bill Gates, it doesn't matter which party's in power in the UK, when he flies over, they roll the red carpet out to him. He gets to speak to give advice to our government about climate change, about dealing with pandemics, and he's profiting from all of these areas. And during the pandemic itself, the BBC, who have a no advertising policy on there, allowed Bill Gates to go and promote the products which he'd invested in. And that is unbelievable. But he gave money to the BBC. He gives money to newspapers, groups in the UK, and they indulge him. But Bill Gates is being seen by an increasing proportion of the globe. Well, he's probably one of the most hated men on the planet. I wouldn't swap with him for all his money.
No, and he can't take it with him, Mark. When Trump got in, President Trump got in, I was praying that Gates might end up behind bars. He needs to be there. If we look at Garvey, I know your country's collapsed, but New Zealand has completely collapsed to the Gates money. He's got property here. He owns the Otago Medical School in Dunedin. Garvey funds it, basically. What do you think we can do about the Gates issue, Mark?
Well, I think there's really only one, strong, effective path forward. Is every single thing that this person owns, all the profits made on the whole COVID operation, which are unprecedented in history, all the land he's bought, and the same applies to Borla. These are all proceeds of crime. They should be seized. Whatever legitimate government exists, if it's going to be one of these old world governments wrestled back into being a valid government, like we hope that, Trump and RFK, we can clearly see it in Florida. We see it in a few countries like Argentina. All their assets should be seized. They should be arrested. And rather than them being able to take the money they've made on the killing to further take over the planet and do more killing, it all needs to be reversed. There's no reason to negotiate with these people. The negotiations should have ended a long time ago. And I hope, when I think of what's the most optimistic, I hope that is the plan, because negotiating with them is immoral.
Mary, I referenced science and the denuding of the medical profession. Can we look a little bit more at what you're doing there? You are suing the Federation of State Medical Boards. Dr. Bruce Dooley, who is a New Zealand doctor who spoke out against the FSMB in 2022, he has lost his license to practice. He's one of the most ethical doctors I know, as you both are as well. He's lost his license for giving ivermectin, in effect. And it all comes from the medical board in New Zealand that is run by the Federation of State Medical Boards. We'll have a quick look here, and then, Mary, I want to just hear from you what you are doing about this very dark group. But let's talk about then what happened in 1913, and we're coming into this organisation of which I had never heard. Nobody I have asked has ever heard of it, and I understand from research I've done, most doctors have no idea that it exists.
I had no idea.
You had no idea?
Oh, I had no idea. In fact, I can tell you right now that I have never met a doctor when I bring up the Federation of State Medical Boards who knows what I'm talking about. And little do they know how much their medical registration actually is being actioned through that organization. But we'll talk about how. And it is a private organization. This is nothing transparent. This is nothing voted on. This is nothing that is brought out in the media anywhere that I can see in the world. No. And it influences New Zealand's medical council. And it influences medical boards and councils around the world, not just in America. The international arm of the Federation was established in the mid-1990s. So it's relatively new, it's 30 years or so. And so New Zealand has joined that international arm, and it's located at the same address in 400 Fuller Drive in Euless, Texas. And by the way, that's a very interesting thing, and hopefully you'll be able to show a picture of it. This is a not insignificant complex. It's two massive two-story buildings with 300 plus employees. That is really quite a large organization. Oddly, it's tucked away in a suburban street in Texas, but it does have a sister branch in Washington, doesn't it? Yeah. It's very unusual
that we would know nothing about this. But take us back to the formation so we can begin there. Can you research easily the formation of this organisation? Is there paperwork? Are there discussions? Is there governmental interplay with the people founding this? What was your research yielding?
It is absolutely astonishing to me that an organization this old
and this powerful
and this much influence and power, if you would say, seems to have risen out of nowhere. I can't find it. It's almost like there's a blackout on where this came from in 1913, which is an interesting year in itself.
Why do you say it's an interesting year?
Well, that was the year that the Federal Reserve was formed, and that's a story about how that came to be. And also, it was the same year that the Internal Revenue Service, the first taxation of Americans, income tax, was done. So it was a very powerful, busy year, I think.
And this that's an interesting one just to leave hanging there, because this is big control mechanisms for money. And this organisation was at its heart, it seems to me, an absolute control mechanism for doctors.
Well, I believe that. And it seems to stack up with what happened historically back then, which was, as we were talking about, the natural medical therapies were being taught. Actually, I understand there's like 2,000 medical schools back then that were teaching all kinds of natural therapies. A friend of Rockefeller, Dale Carnegie, commissioned a fellow named Flexner to basically investigate these medical schools. And he came out with what we call the Flexner Report, which is quite famous among us that we know, which basically wiped out all but about 150 medical schools.
From 2,000 to 150?
Yeah, they basically eliminated them, their license to teach, et cetera, and they established a very small number of allopathic medical schools. Samuel Hahnemann was the founder of homeopathy, and homeopathy at the time was really powerful. It was actually very, very much a competitor to the pharmaceutical that was just being established at the time.
As a mother, I became fascinated with Hahnemann. I read all about him, and I studied a certain amount to help my children. I had phenomenal results with babies, so that's not psychosomatic. That I couldn't suggest to them. But Hahnemann was a doctor who was disillusioned with people coming back and back to him still sick, and he wanted to find something that would help their immune system be stronger. So that's fascinating that there was actually this system in America that was supporting both pharmaceutical in its early days and an alternative that was yielding good results. So, Mary, if you look at the building in which they operate in your neck of the woods in Texas, it even looks like the Nazi symbol from the air. It's quite extraordinary. Nobody, when we put up that interview in 2022, knew about the FSMB. Most doctors had no idea it rules their lives. When did you first discover them and how they are denuding your profession, ruining it, bullying the good doctors?
Yeah, like you said, I had no knowledge of this entity prior to the pandemic, but they sent out a proclamation. They sent out a letter, a directive to all the medical boards in the country, advising them to go after doctors for spreading misinformation, for prescribing ivermectin. And it's a private organization, so they're not subjected to the same rules of transparency that the state medical boards are subjected to. And it's curious why they have all this influence on these government-run medical licensing boards. So I'm joining a lawsuit with 3 other physicians. All of us have suffered at the hands of this entity, the FSMB, have been fighting for our licenses. And we're suing them over, most of it centers around First Amendment rights, that they're going after us for exercising our free speech rights.
It's absolutely shocking, Mark, that they rule you and that these edicts come from a Rockefeller-run institution. When did you first learn about the Federation of State Medical Boards and the Rockefeller influence on doctors, in effect?
Well, I think in Canada, we began to learn about this when Dr. Gary Davidson did the investigation on the Alberta government's response. And I think it was sort of out of that I began to learn about this. And I don't know enough about it yet. But once again, you see, there's the medical industry, the old medical industry that, again, is crumbling. And many of us have exited it. And I think as patients and as doctors, we've exited. This is this top-down model, and it has at the bottom the people who are being processed according to protocols that ultimately are funneled in through billionaires who hate mankind and want to take advantage and profit on mankind. And so that's why you see such consistent things. You see doctor prescribes ivermectin almost anywhere in the world, comes under investigation and has their license revoked by these old, now illegitimate medical boards. That's why you see schools all around the world sexualizing children and confusing them on their gender. Again, this is also, WHO funneled, globalist funneled, top-down things. And that's where we are, I think, as a species now, is we have to flip that whole thing on its head, put the individual at the top. And as Dolores Cahill says, if you're acting on honor and doing no harm, then you have your rights. When you act in dishonor and you do harm, like these parasite class, then you lose your rights. And so I think, we can't ignore these corrupted institutions, but we must free our minds and our bodies and our children and our actions from them. And that's why people aren't going to see their old doctor who's still on his knees submitted to it. And as for the doctors who have submitted to that, I think that the majority of them are victims. They're victims of manipulation and psyop control, because that's what's happened everywhere. If you follow the guidelines, you get the money. But we have to remember, most of them, not only were they coerced by the medical boards, not only were they coerced by the medical boards to commit these medical crimes against population, they were coerced into submitting to it. So, they literally injected themselves with genetic goo to cause themselves to poison their own bodies. They've injected their wives, their husbands, their children. So I think we need to recognize, sure, our doctors, leaders, like Andrew, Mary, myself, you could say, well, are we victims in this war? Yeah, they take your license, they kick you out of parliament. But you have to remember, the doctors that stayed in it, the nurses that stayed in it, they've literally poisoned themselves and their relatives, and they're walking around blindfolded. Like, that is worse than losing your home or your medical license. And then with the same part of humanity no longer accepts, as long as they have a license from the medical board. In fact, a lot of people say, hey, if a doctor still has their license in Canada, I can't trust them. I need to find one of those doctors who lost their license because of COVID, so I can go to an auditorium or a website and learn the truth and do the best I can to manage my family's health without subjecting them to medical assault.
It's interesting, there's such a delay with your link coming out of Canada, where we all know you're being horrifically censored and silenced by Carney, but we'll try to pick those little delays out in the final edit. Andrew, when you see the piece on the FSMB and you hear that at the time that it was created in 1913, there was actually a very large cohort of homeopathic hospitals across America, and the royal family in the UK used homeopathy. They knew the effect of it.
They still do, Liz. Well, I've looked at what's been going on, and once you speak out and go against the narrative, you get accosted by lawfare, which is very expensive due to the corruption of the judiciary around the world. But an easier hit for them, if you're in a profession, is the professional regulators, whether that's the medical boards, licensing boards in America or Canada, the GMC, the General Medical Council in the UK, or if you're a solicitor, the SRA, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, the Civil Aviation Authority. Every one of these organisations has taken money from the World Economic Forum through the Regulators Pioneer Fund, which has usurped control of all these professional agencies. And it was no different in Parliament. I'd been an MP quite happily for 12 years with no problems with parliamentary standards. And it's the moment I spoke out about the vaccines, I had, for 2.5 years, I had back-to-back investigations by parliamentary standards, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Commissioner and their successors. Well, what I'll tell you now, and this is news, is that the previous one that that brought cases against me, and the current one that brought cases against me, and other MPs who've spoken out, they're both now facing litigation themselves, and they won't like being under the spotlight. And as I've said to you before, the way our institutions have been corrupted is that if you're a corrupt head of any organisation, when you come to move on or retire, you've got to make sure that the person that takes over from you is at least as corrupt as you were. And that has led to institutionalised endemic corruption across our institutions. And when we sort this out, there's going to be great opportunities for people who want to actually be proper public servants and purveyors of their professions, because we're going to have to take the top off all of our institutions.
Are you taking that litigation, or is someone else, Andrew?
I'm associated with one of them, because obviously once they're corrupted, they go on to another regulatory job on another regulator, and we've actually caught them red-handed at another regulator. So. Yep. So Catherine Stone and Daniel Greenberg, watch out.
That is exciting, Mary. It is wonderful when people push back. That's why I think you gathered such excitement. I mean, I first came across you when you were it was at Christmas time, it was summer here in New Zealand, and I was riveted, instead of being on the beach, riveted to your interview on the Danny Jones podcast with Dr. Jack Cruz, and you were talking to Callie Means. And you were clearly, Mary, questioning why we were trying to be diverted into something that was really yes, it would have been valid prior to COVID, but there's a giant elephant in the room, and you were saying, I won't ignore the elephant in the room, and you will not distract the people from the elephant. How have they gone, the Means brother and sister, in the administration?
They seem to be gaining power. I mean, we were really shocked when Casey Means was appointed Surgeon General. Not sure what's going on, why it's taking so long for that to actually happen. She, like myself, is an ENT, but she didn't finish her residency. And when you look back at her social media posts, she never once spoke out about COVID or the COVID shots, or anything really. I don't know if her account was scrubbed or if she just really didn't have an opinion about the greatest public health crisis in our lifetime. And then Callie just sort of parachuted into the medical freedom movement, and we think hijacked it, shifted the focus to food and chronic disease, which, like I've said many times, I completely agree with his message. I have no problems with it, but he doesn't agree with ours. And the medical freedom movement has been sort of pushed aside at the expense of the MAHA movement. And, like you said, the elephant in the room seems to be completely ignored. Very frustrating.
It was a clever move, Mark, but we're seeing it with the Charlie Kirk, the diversions there. We see it everywhere. It's if you're into pattern recognition, it's the same patterning. Let's try to divert the people's attention, and the people mustn't allow that to happen anymore, Mark. What's your reaction to the Means?
Well, I agree with that, and I think Dr. Bowden makes a very good point, which is you've got to be cautious of people who suddenly appear and are suddenly the new leaders of the movement who weren't really involved, or maybe were doing the opposite. Now, I know there are people who are legitimate, like, for instance, I can think of, a famous doctor who was pro-vax until his father died, and then that made him rethink things, and then he started. But I think we have to be very cautious of these people who suddenly appear as the leaders and are there to divert the movement. For instance, like Dr. Bowden said, if the medical freedom movement isn't dealing with the greatest crime against humanity, the greatest medical crisis in history, which is the COVID operation, then it's not legitimate. And I think we have to be very cautious of that.
Where do you think, Mark, that the medical profession will go? You referenced people as saying, I just won't go to my doctor. I don't want to go to a hospital anymore. We have 8 to 12-hour waits now. We're a third world country, New Zealand, medically speaking. Where do you think it will go? Will people start to look further and further afield into other modalities, health modalities?
Well, I think they already are. And I think that, if like there are places in the world where we see good movement, for instance, Florida, where you have, some of the least abuse of the people during the COVID operations, where you have a senator who was first to start dialing back what was being pumped into the world through the WHO, where you have, a surgeon general who really does follow the science and really does talk about important issues like morals and ethics. And you have a few surprising spots in the planet, like Argentina, where people like ourselves are getting awards from the president for science and ethics. Strangely, El Salvador is a bit of a bright spot. Slovakia is a bit of a bright spot. I would like to see this global war one in a big swoop. In other words, I would love to see the Trump administration, for instance, actually be a wartime administration dealing with the war that humanity didn't start, that's been thrown at us. Otherwise, I think what we're going to see is more and more people will not go to old school doctors because they can't be trusted. They will manage their health at home. They will seek health coaches, and in a lot of places in the country, including the UK, some of the best doctors are now health coaches. And I think you'll see medical tourism to the few places in the world that get this right. And there'll be a booming industry of medical tourism in the couple of states or couple of countries in the world that have got this right. That's what I see happening.
Mary, my partner the other week did an enormous cut with a very sharp knife right down past his thumbnail and past his knuckle. And I did it. I said, we can't go to the hospital. I don't trust them. So I put gauze on it and we put the wound together and I put chlorine dioxide on it. Within 10 days, this is no exaggeration, that is beautifully knitted together. It's barely a scar. And it was, I felt like breaking out champagne, Mary. I thought we can start to really take responsibility for our own health. And if you look at that piece earlier about the FSMB, prior to us being made to be dependent on doctors, to being made to believe that everything comes out of a needle or a pill, if we want to be healthy, there was a vast network of herbalists and naturopaths and people looking at far more perhaps honouring medicines that worked with the body. So where do you see the future of medicine, Mary?
Yeah, we need to decentralize medicine. I mean, that's the basic fundamental problem with our healthcare system, and go back to the individual doctor-patient relationship. Get the third parties out of that relationship. And people forget, I mean, just like your friend, the body is designed to heal. And the best thing you can do for your health is, stick to the fundamentals, keep your weight under control, eat healthy, get enough sleep, and manage your stress, spend time outside. It's very basic. You do all those things, odds are you're not going to really need much medical care.
What most struck you when you were on the Joe Rogan podcast, I mean, the biggest podcast in the world, and also with Tucker, what most struck you about the way they questioned you and their own awareness? They're certainly not like legacy media front people. They're not broken in, are they?
No, I mean, both of them very authentic. I mean,
Yes.
they're exactly off camera. They're exactly the same as they are on camera. I was a little bit surprised when Tucker seemed so shocked. I don't know if you remember, I was saying, all babies at that time, the government was telling us all babies should get 3 COVID shots by the age of 9 months. And Tucker didn't know that, that surprised me. But Tucker has been, and Joe Rogan have both been very much on our side. I was very grateful that they had me on at, 4 or 5 years after the fact. We're still talking about this. And Joe Rogan said something about that. People are complaining that he continues to talk about COVID, but thank God he is. I mean, we need it. And I know that Tucker is having Andrew Huff on maybe this week to talk about, COVID crimes. So it's encouraging that these two big platforms are continuing to talk about it.
I would love to see you on Joe Rogan talking about the digital ID in the UK, Andrew, because you really are ground zero for that. And Andrew, that the role of people like that in our world, as we mentioned earlier, legacy media is dying. The BBC is laughable now. When I was in mainstream media, we treated anything from the BBC like the message from God. I wouldn't believe anything out of the BBC now, Andrew.
Well, I mean, I remember seeing an article some time ago, and it was whether Sky News or GB News had got the number 2 slot for news in the UK. But then you saw the numbers. It was 64,000 viewers out of a population of 68 million or 68 million of us. And it's a bad tweet, really.
Yeah.
They're sitting on top of their molehills. They've lost credibility with the public, and that's why there's the appetite for the Tucker Carlsons, the Joe Rogans, or Russell Brand, who I was interviewed with a week or so ago. What's going to happen? I think there's going to be a loss of. There already is a loss of trust in organised medicine. There's going to be a massive loss of trust in politicians around the globe, and until we admit the mistakes that have been made, we're not moving forward. We're not addressing the harms that have been done and starting to rebuild that trust. And we have to confront it, because, as we know, those who fail to learn from the mistakes of history will be doomed to repeat them. And whether it's repeated on us, I don't think it could be, but I don't want it repeated on 2 or 3 generations from now either. So we've got to get it sorted once and for all, and hold those responsible for, as Mark says, those crimes against humanity. And when I accused the government of crimes against humanity, I was accused in the chamber of the House of Commons of putting colleagues' lives at risk and costing the government a fortune to protect everyone. Well, the answer is to level with the people and tell them the truth, and then you don't have any trouble at all, because I didn't have any trouble with the public coming to accost me, I can assure you.
You are so unique among politicians. When I put you together with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya prior to his position now, he was very excited to talk to you, Andrew, because he said he stands out among world politicians. Almost nobody else had the courage at the time to speak against the COVID jabs. Do you still, even knowing that you were cheated out of your electorate, out of the results that you should have had in the last election in the UK, even with all the brutality of Starmer and the criminality there right now in the UK, do you still believe in politics, or do we need a new way forward for that as well?
Well, the current systems we've got in Europe, they don't serve the people. That's the system that's got us into this mess, and I don't think it's going to be part of the solution to get us out of it. And we need a different system of governance to the one we've got now, because it's every agency which was to protect the public interest has failed them, and nothing less than the members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords. So now we're working on a better system to take over now.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, we're going to have to move to more of a direct democracy, where we've got to decentralise and we've got to get power closer back to the people, because you can only perpetrate crimes like this when you've got centralised power. And you can't trust politicians. They're very corruptible. So people have got to I'm afraid, get interested in their form of governance and take part with regular referendums on the law. And people will say, well, I'm not interested in politics. Well, the politicians are very interested in you. That's what I would say. And when you're not interested and you abdicate your responsibility to others, we end up in the mess we're in now, and we can't end up back in this situation again. We've got to, when we get out of it, we've got to stay out of it with a better system.
Even with digital ID, Mary, it's crazy, isn't it? We should know everything about our politicians, and they should know almost nothing about us. And yet right. Here, that's being reversed as well. Andrew, you might want to say a bit more about that, and then your views. Mary.
Well, I like that saying, that when the public are scared of the politicians, it's tyranny, and when the politicians are scared of the public, that's democracy. Well, the public are very scared in Europe about their politicians and what's going to be inflicted on them next. And we've forgotten that the politicians are supposed to work for the people. They're servants, not masters, but that's not what we've got now. And it's got to change.
President Trump is so enigmatic, because sometimes he does really good things, like the appointment of Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Kirk Milhoan to the CDC, Mary. He is such a decent doctor. He helped us in the Baby Will case. So he's doing some good appointments that would go against what the Big Pharma...
He's mercurial, isn't he? He's mercurial, isn't he? He's mercurial.
Mary, where's your feeling with politics? You mentioned decentralisation also with the medical profession. That's where it has to be with everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I formed that organization, Americans for Health Freedom, to weed out the good politicians, because I don't think they're all corrupt. And there are many that have truly, to me, it's a very strong litmus test, how you fall on this COVID position. Did you hide or did you speak out like Andrew Bridgen? And my goal is to identify the politicians who pass that litmus test and amplify their voices without spending a lot of money, because that's another problem, is that they're so dependent on the money to get their word out. But social media is an avenue to promote them and get the word out where they're not so dependent on their donors. So we can get that third party out of the way so they can really speak their minds and get back to the people.
Any that you want me to help promote, I would love to do that with you side by side, Mary. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Well, my website, americansforhealthfreedom.org, has all the politicians that passed the litmus test.
Right.
And so there's a long list of them.
And so what else do you want from the people for that? Do the people join in there and donate money to help you build that? What is it you're needing to make that go really gangbusters?
Yeah, we've collected some donations. We haven't even spent any money yet. What we need is people to really reach out to these politicians and get them on board. There's a very simple pledge that they can sign. All they have to state is that they believe that the COVID shot should be pulled off the market. There's one second question that says they pledge they will not take donations from Big Pharma, but that's optional. And we just keep the momentum going, because courage is contagious. More people that we get speaking out, the better. More people will come forward.
That sounds a wonderful model, Mark. Had you heard of it? And is that something you drive in Canada as well?
Yeah, I have heard of it, and I believe there's some Canadian participation in that. And forgive me for not having the details tip of my tongue, but I've been in some meetings where similar action, or maybe it really was Dr. Bowden's site they were talking about. I think it's a brilliant idea. Let's get politicians or anyone to step forward and make the right stance. And, a similar thing exists, I think, with medical doctors. In fact, I've been in meetings lately and I've been saying, if you're a legitimate state, like let's say, for instance, Florida or Argentina or El Salvador, or maybe with Dr. Bowden's leadership, Texas will be one of the first to cross the line into becoming a legitimate state that respects human rights and actually is based on truth. Then go to all these other countries, go to England, go to Canada, and go to the medical colleges' websites and look for the nurses, look for the doctors who've been persecuted, stripped of their licenses, etc., over COVID. And there you have it. You've just cherry-picked the best people in the country. And bringing those people together to provide phenomenal health care. And when people can see the difference, it's just going to become contagious.
Andrew, I see you nodding. It's a brilliant idea.
Well, we've got so many excellent doctors who've lost their licenses, been struck off in the UK for raising legitimate concerns. And I don't know what the rules are in America and in Canada, but I presume they're the same as in the UK, where a doctor has a duty of care to speak out if they think that a medicine or a procedure's harming their patients. And I'm thinking about Dr. Mohammed Adil, who's a cancer specialist who spoke out. David Cartland was a general practitioner who spoke out.
He was so persecuted, Dr. David Cartland.
Absolutely hammered. Sam White, so many doctors, even university professors. Professor Norman Fenton, he's probably the finest statistician in the UK. And he only ran the numbers that were given to him about the number of people being hurt by the vaccines, and he got the probabilities. So he didn't understand the science. He just did the maths. And he was forced to retire early, and they persuaded his students that he was an anti-vaxxer, and they were just numbers. He only ran the numbers, did the analysis, and said, on the balance of this is, odds are it's, so many to one that it's going to be the vaccines that are causing all of these deaths and harms. And really, the people who've paid the price, they're the people I want to see running those universities, not being forced out of them. I want to see those doctors running our health service, because I would have confidence in people like that. People like, Pierre Corey in America and Mary and Mark, people who'd stand up for the care of the patient and for the principle of truth and medical ethics. They're the ones we can't afford to lose from those professions.
We have a group in New Zealand doctors speaking out with science, and it's good because it's got SOS. It is a real SOS for doctors. But Mary, it's an SOS for patients as well. I'd like a message from each of you now, just to the people who've quietly gone away from the system where they've been, I've interviewed many over these last 5 years, where they've gone into the doctors again and again and been told, as you mentioned, Mary, in your interviews, been told they have psychological problems, anxiety, been put on anxiety meds, that they're imagining that they're ill. The cruelty of that. And one of them was a 23-year-old who was at the start of her life, in love, happy in a job, healthy, fit, and ended up very quickly from one Pfizer jab in a wheelchair and was trolled because she was one of the early ones to speak out, cruelly trolled and taunted. Jacinda Ardern would never meet with her, would never listen to her story, no matter how many people send it to her. These people have been suffering, many of them, for 5 years now. So what's your message, Mary, when they just feel as if they've been cast on a heap and they have no value as humans?
Yeah, it's very tragic. And I mean, there are groups that they can go to seek help. React 19, wonderful organization. They've given out more money to the vaccine injured than our government has. Independent Medical Alliance or Association, IMA, is another wonderful group where you can find like-minded doctors. American Frontline Doctors, another group. So I would just say, find like-minded people. There are doctors out there that are trying to help. I will say it's a lot of trial and error, but in general, I do see improvements. So there is reason for hope. And then, make sure that you do file a claim with the government, even though it may seem futile. One other thing I would like to mention is VAERS, so the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. That was a requirement. If you were giving out these COVID shots and you had somebody come to you afterwards and report a possible reaction, even if you can't prove it, those providers are required by law to submit a report to VAERS. So if you went to a doctor or a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant or even the pharmacist and you told them that you think you had a reaction and they didn't report you to VAERS, you can sue them. And there's a statute of limitations of 6 years. So there's still time to do this. And there's a attorney, Warner Mendenhall, who is leading this effort. He has a group called Freedom Council, and just a network of like-minded attorneys who are working to fight for people that were harmed by these shots. So that is an avenue that you may have other than the government, which seems to be very little help at this point.
Have you been in touch with Albert Benavides, whom I've spoken to? He does tremendous research into VAERS, but the VAERS reporting is spotty, inconsistent, arbitrary. It is shocking how casually the crucial data is being recorded, if it's recorded at all, Mary.
Yes. I mean, none of the patients that I've seen for injuries were reported to VAERS by other providers. And I will say in the last month, the reports that I've submitted, I've gotten way faster feedback from the government than I had prior to Kennedy being head of HHS. So they seem to be more responsive now, which is encouraging.
I might put you in touch with Albert. He does terrific research on VAERS, so it could just help to streamline that even further. Mark, what's your reaction with VAERS? And what is your message to those who feel cast aside from our society? Such a brutal thing to do, injure them and then give them no help.
Well, I think there's a few things. One thing is there's a continuing scam going on. And I've had people reach out to me, even in the United States, to say, my cardiologist finally admitted that my myocarditis was due to the so-called vaccine. And yet they would go home and look at their paperwork and say, but wait a minute, my paperwork says I have a long COVID injury. And when they called the clinics or they called the doctor and said, hey, why is the diagnosis not what the doctor told me? They were told, well, because there's no billing code for that. So in other words, you have doctors coding things that are COVID vaccine injuries as long COVID syndromes. in order to get paid, because there's no way to get paid because there's no checkbox for the truth. So I think that's a big thing. The other thing I would say is, stop going to a poison well expecting to get anything except poison. So for instance, if you're in a place like if you're in Texas and you could see Dr. Bowden, please give her a hug when you do, and a bottle of wine. But if you're in other countries, you have to take responsibility. There are those of us who have kept our oaths, and people have to understand that. It's like, your job as a doctor is not to obey the medical board or the college. Your job as a doctor is to fulfill the Hippocratic Oath and to fulfill your religious duties. For instance, treating others the way you wish to be treated. And when those two diverge, when you wake up one day and the board says, hey, listen, you're not going to treat others the way you wish to be treated, you're going to lie, you're going to steal, you can't follow that. So there are nurses in our country like Sarah Shajuni and Krista Nagel. There are doctors like Patrick Phillips and Chris Shoemaker that continue to serve the public, like with almost no resources. So these are people you've got to look for advice. The World Council for Health has been at the tip of this spear fighting this since the beginning. And at this point, in the effort to do, as we were speaking about earlier, we need to decentralize. We don't want another authoritarian top down. So now you have World Council for Health New Zealand, World Council for Health UK, World Council for Health Canada, World Council for Health Florida, Rhode Island. So there are organizations growing to help you. So go there, get the help you need, and support the organizations that are growing. We've got to build the new world.
Dr. Shoemaker's extraordinary in Canada, such a brave man also. Andrew, your message for those many who've come to you as you've given your talks around the country and you're in such demand there because people want the truth. What do you say to those who say, Andrew, I'm injured, I've been hurt by this? What's your advice to those who are quietly suffering in their homes?
The insult in the UK is that the government has spent far more money on lawyers fighting off the applications of the vaccine armed and vaccine bereaved than they have on compensation. And I suspect that will be the same around the world. And those priorities are completely wrong. The fact is that the truth is like a lion. You never have to protect the truth. All we have to have is to have the courage to set it free. And it is being set free. They're not going to get the 20 years they told me in 2023 that they wanted to cover up the vaccine harms and excess deaths. And we are going to be holding people to account. And there are protocols out there. And, I'm a big fan of Peter McCullough, and Dr. Tina Pears in the UK is doing some excellent work with various treatments for the vaccine harmed, and I'm appalled. I mean, this long COVID and new COVID. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're just covers for vaccine injury.
Would you agree with that, Mary?
Yeah. So one thing I'm looking at is the spike protein antibody level in patients that got the shots and comparing that to the ones that didn't get the shots. And it is a dramatic difference. So years after getting these shots, and most of the patients I see got 2 or maybe 3 shots, their spike protein antibody levels are 10 times higher than the people that did not get the shots. And that's just not normal. I mean, it's a little bit muddy because we don't have a direct test for spike protein. This is just an indirect way of measuring spike protein, but it suggests that these people are continuing to produce or are unable to break down spike protein in the body, and spike protein is poison. That's the one that's part of the virus that causes all the damage.
Mark, you're nodding there. Have you heard of that as well? Long production of spike protein.
Well, there's no question, and quite by design. I mean, Pfizer completely committed fraud with all the governments, and it's hard to believe again. There's every reason to take all their assets. They committed fraud because they're what's called the plasmid map of the plasmid DNA that's not even supposed to be in the shots, but that was used to make the shot. On that plasmid map, they intentionally deleted, they handed fraudulent documents to the regulators, and they eliminated SV40 promoter and SV40 enhancer sequences. What those sequences are, from research going back to the 90s, is those are little genetic sequences that help do what otherwise is very hard to do, which is to permanently genetically modify the person so they would poison themselves to death for as long as they live. Is that happening? To what degree is that happening? Well, for sure it is happening, and I'll tell you some evidence of that. one bit of evidence of that is we have studies showing people still producing the spike protein 700 days after their last injection. Even for this sort of Frankenstein mRNA that's in there, that's way too long. So that is a sign of ongoing genetic modification of the cells. We have studies on cancer cells that show that these cancer cells that grew in injection victims' bodies, that they have been genetically modified. So they have the spike protein sequence in the cell's chromosomes. So there's lots of concern for long-term damage. Just like I think we saw with HIV, treatment is a lifelong thing. We can do things to extend life. We hope everyone's not been permanently genetically modified, but certainly some people have. We can already see that. In terms of this long COVID business, I do believe, and I'm referring to some of the work of Dr. Maravik Villa from Florida, who's a great researcher and clinician in this area, that yes, indeed, taking these shots turns out to be a terrible idea. The ongoing spike protein, and as Dr. Bowden said, seen at this point through the reflection of the body continuing to produce antibodies against the spike protein. And these patterns of disease that you see in the injection victims, that is most of what we're seeing. But there are a portion of people who never took the shots, who had a natural infection. This was a weaponized virus, which is why the spike protein of the weaponized virus is so bad when you genetically modify people to make it. But I think there are a smaller proportion of people who do have a long COVID syndrome, but the lion's share of what we're seeing is a result of the genetic injections, and it's being misdiagnosed as anything from myocarditis to all these different diagnoses, or mistreated as long COVID syndrome when a lot of it is injection injury.
They find so many ways, Andrew, to obfuscate, to hide, to mislead. With the Barry Young data, it was very clear in a small country like New Zealand that different parts of the country got very different concentrations of the dose, that there was more saline, probably more innocent jabs given out, certainly in the early days in the large population centres, and far more concentrated, very nasty doses sent to the deep South Island where there are fewer people. But Andrew, if you were, and when you are Prime Minister of the UK, what are you going to do with that sort of criminality that Mark just outlined? From Pfizer, which already had the biggest criminal fine for any big pharmaceutical company well before the COVID pandemic was rolled out, and committed criminal acts again. So what would you do with a company like that, and with this whole COVID jab as advice to President Trump, if you were leader?
Well, all those who've been a party to what's been perpetrated against the people need to be held to account. And I'm afraid those with the most responsibility are going to have to face very severe penalties for two reasons. First of all, as we talked about earlier, to restore that public trust. And also, secondly, that anyone who takes on a position of that responsibility, if you behave like that, we are going to punish you very, very severely. It's got to work both ways to build back that trust between the leaders in our society, the medical care, science, and the public, because otherwise we're not going to have that trust again quite clearly. Why would they?
And it's easy to talk about that in the abstract, but what it will take is the people now leading the politicians, the people now demanding better, the people now demanding that these politicians and big corporate executives who've done this are put behind bars. So it really now, Andrew, is up to us, isn't it?
We have one advantage in the UK. We do have the ability to bring private criminal prosecution, something that's not available to American citizens, to bring a criminal prosecution against someone who's committed a crime. Well, we do. Although I think Starmer is intent on two things: A, stopping that in the near future, and B, ending trial by jury, which will devastate our judicial system. But at the moment, we still have the ability to bring private criminal prosecutions, and those are the sort of things that we're brought against our regulators, as I mentioned earlier, and that is how we're going to have to do it.
That would be wonderful if groups would get together and pool your funds, or if a billionaire or two or three would come on the right side of history. And Mary, that's what it's going to take. To finish up today, it really is going to take President Trump to decide whether he wants to be on the right side of history or be yet another forgettable criminal, but somebody who could have wrought great damage to the human population if he doesn't step up now and call these people to account and stop the COVID jab, stop the mRNA jab altogether. What do you want to see, Mary? Just to finish.
Well, it's about his legacy. How does he want to go down in history? And he could very easily spin this as I was misled. And now that I know the truth, I'm going to speak up and do the right thing and protect the people that he was elected to protect. It's about his legacy, though. How does he want to go down in history? Because it's going to come out. It's all coming. It is coming out. But it, like Andrew said, I mean, the truth, it doesn't. It will come out, and it may not come out while he's still alive. But his legacy depends on him, how he acts on this issue.
If Robert F. Kennedy Jr. rang you tomorrow and asked you to serve as part of his administration, would you say yes? And if so, what would be the changes you'd say to him that must be implemented immediately?
I would say yes, only if I had no muzzle, which I don't think they would allow. So if I were allowed to completely speak my mind, then I would say yes. Otherwise, I think I'm better on the outside calling them out.
And helping the patients you help and being on the large platforms you've been on and getting the message out. Mark, we're going to finish with you today. Your message to the administration in America that could make such a difference, but also a message to the people who are listening today to not give up. I spoke to a warrior man yesterday. He said, I'm giving up, Liz. Nobody's listening to us. And I said, we can't give up. I've got a great saying, Mark, knocked down 7 times, get up 8. We must get up one more time, then we're knocked down. So your final message today, Dr. Mark Trozzi.
Well, my message to President Trump and the administration would be you are a wartime president. You know, this is 5th generation warfare, as Dr. Mons pointed out. It must be dealt as such. And yes, it's not only a chance to go down in history as a great hero, but it's also a chance to guarantee for the people you love and your own family that there's a future worth living. As well, because this is war, because we're talking about war crimes, you have the expedient options of military tribunals. This doesn't have to be slow drag through civil courts where, people with billions of dollars can play all kinds of tricks and get away with murder. So I would say in that respect, go for it. And then in terms of people feeling frustrated, get together with people like you. I just toured 5 provinces of Canada and spoke to many auditoriums full of people. And everywhere I went, I discovered something. There are freedom groups everywhere. So stop living in isolation. Stop, going to a church that has abandoned God and being frustrated. Go to the little church growing near you. And I'm using church somewhat as a metaphor. Get involved in the freedom groups close to you. Spend time surrounded by like-minded people. And take comfort in the fact that group of people, whether because they never took these jabs or whether because they're taking advantage of the information we're putting out to increase their health and survival, that your group has a higher chance of survival and maintaining their mental and physical abilities. And that I would highly recommend people get together, work together.
That's wonderful. And to finish with you, Dr. Mark Trozzi, who's probably been the most censored on this talk because they really have tried to interfere with your link, I think. Perhaps Andrew and Mary, there is one final point he's just raised. It's a spiritual war, Andrew, and you could speak to that, and we'll finish with you, Mary. This is a war of good against evil on the earth right now, isn't it, Andrew?
It is. And okay, I've got some qualifications from a long time ago in biological sciences, but also in behavior. And, we've been on this planet as humans for long enough that we would have evolved the winning strategy. And if the winning strategy were to be bad and evil, we've been here long enough that we'd all be bad and evil because that's the only way you'd survive. Well, the fact that most people on the planet are still good tells me that we're going to win. We have to win because that's the winning strategy.
Mary, your comment there on the spiritual war that we're in.
Yeah, I don't know if I can improve upon that, but I think it's just, you grow up thinking the good guys always win. There is some truth to that, but the bad guys are always there. And we have to remember that they're always trying to win, and we just must keep fighting.
Wonderful to talk to you all. It was a real honor. Thank you so much. It's been worth getting up at 4 a.m. to have this talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. You do amazing work. We're so grateful for you, the real journalists.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to be linked. Thank you.